Welcome back, everyone, to ethicstv, and I'm joined today by Dr. Robin Craig. We've just found out that we're on not only the exact same time zone, but within a few kilometers of each other, which is rare.
I'm not stalking you.
That's right. No, exactly. I'm not sure. Well, all the other way around. But it's great because mostly on ethicstv, I tend to be 15,000 kilometers away from the nearest person. So this has been an unusual pleasure. This is episode 31, which means that we're getting deeper into the double digits of recordings. And so I've been fascinated by the career of the person opposite me, and the bio, of course, for Robin, you can read in the description. So I won't beleaguer him with my bad attempts at intro, but obviously his career is widely spanning, and so you can read about that there. But Robin, what would you say is keeping you busy right now and the most interested in your varied career and existence?
Yeah, well, that's actually a difficult question because it is so varied. Basically, I do a lot of things, and I don't tend to spend 100% of my time in any one of them. So I'm involved in a company that does governance, risk compliance software. I've largely retired from a biotech company, and of course I write novels and I write serious philosophy. So the only thing coming up is this fascinating video interview I'm having. And in a few months, I'm actually giving a talk on the ethics of self-aware AI to Australian Mensa at their annual meeting. So that may generate some interesting responses.
I bet it might. And so are you allowed to tell us the general thoughts you've been thinking about that particular talk? Is there a particular angle you're taking on? I mean, you're widely read, widely authored across fiction and non-fiction, and you've been a radio guest, you speak all over the world. So I can imagine you could take any angle for that particular topic. But without any spoiler alerts, what's your view on the challenges or the risks or the opportunities?
One of the things I do that I didn't mention is speak on cruise ships on science and philosophy. That's actually my main interest in these things. So not just the science, not just the philosophy, but where science and philosophy meet. So with AI, although it makes background, I'm not that interested in the ethics of AI as it is today. I mean, there's lots been written about that, and the principles aren't that difficult, really. But my interest is more what's coming, and is AI ever going to be self-aware? And if it is, what does that mean for its ethics, our ethics towards each other?
And so I'm assuming that that you feel that AI will become self-aware, and I'm going to assume that there is something that is self-aware, has potentially the decision-making criteria of its moral values of what's right and wrong, thus those values determining the behavior to be ontological around what ethics actually is. Is that along the lines of which you're going?
That's pretty much exactly right. There's no point talking about the ethics of AI if you don't, the ethics of self-aware AI if you don't think it's ever going to become self-aware.
Yeah.
Current AI is nowhere close, but that doesn't mean it's not close scientifically in terms of how many years it's going to be. Things like ChatGPT aren't even going to lead to self-awareness, in my opinion, but you can never predict what science is going to do, especially these days where it's pretty much growing exponentially. And so, yes, there's two questions of ethics with them. One is, if it's not self-aware, then basically it's just standard ethical practice like a self-driving car. If it is, though, it's a whole new ballgame. As you say, it becomes capable of making its own decisions, and that includes thinking itself about morality, and then you get into a very interesting area for both us and them.
Yeah. Do you, there's two ends of the spectrum of fear and opportunity. Andreessen at one end being the, hey, listen, to be honest, we shouldn't even regulate, because that will stop innovation. And on the other end is Sam Harris, who catastrophizes to some extent and saying that this is an existential threat. Where are you on that spectrum?
Well, I have a problem with people who think things are existential threats when they look at the one thing. Here's a thing, it's dangerous. Everything's dangerous in isolation. The question is, what about everything else? And in my opinion, there are dangers in very advanced AI, especially self-aware AI, but there are also dangers in not proceeding it because we're scared. Basically, we're one lone planet in a very big universe, and there's all sorts of dangers out there, from the simple cosmic disasters to, aliens. I don't know if you read, there's a series on TV, The Three-Body Problem. It posits that aliens are inherently and necessarily hostile. I don't believe that, but you can't discount. You can't say, oh, I'm too scared of AI to do anything with it. But I'm not at all scared of the possibility of super aliens killing us. Basically, if we can develop very advanced AIs, much smarter than we are, and they're not hostile, but they're our friends, then that actually improves our chance of survival, gives us an ally far more capable than we are. So the big question is an AI going to be ethical? Well, I think you put it yourself. Once it can think, it is going to think about ethics, and it's going to develop an ethics. So the big question becomes, how can we guide that process so that the ethics it comes up with make us its friends, not its enemies?
Yeah, and indeed, I wonder whether to steelman the catastrophizing, that their point is something along the lines of, if you look at it statistically, the greatest risk to the planet is the activities of humans. Therefore, if there was an AI that was tasked with making the world a better place, in quotes, one of the first actions to be taken was to eliminate the thing that's making the world the worst place. I'm wondering whether that would be a fair steel man, or at least a straw man of their argument. Have you heard that one?
I think it has. I think certain people do believe that, but that's because they themselves think human beings are a plague. I'm not one of them. Look at it this way: oxygen-producing organisms wiped out what came before. Should we therefore wipe out oxygen producers? Changes in life are a constant. They're not something radically new. And the question is, I wouldn't get Greenpeace to program our super AI because they might program us to think we are a threat. In fact, I wouldn't actually get anyone to program its ethics, and I think that's where the solution lies, frankly. If you've read anything I've written, you'll see one of the themes I like to push is that there is actually an objective ethics, which means an ethics based on the facts of reality we can observe as judged by our reason. If that's not the case, then ethics are subjective, and if ethics are subjective, it's basically the rule of force. If there's no objective ethics, then who am I to say anything? Who are you to say anything? How do we decide? It all devolves to force then. But if there is an objective ethics, then that's something a thinking mind can derive. And I argue there is an objective ethics. I argue that it's based on the linkage between is and ought, which is the conditionality of life. Fairly long chain of logic, but it goes from the basis of objective ethics is the needs of a living being. The needs of a thinking being are thinking, and the morality of a thinking being is rationality, and the ethics and rights thinking beings owe other thinking beings is individual rights, in the American sense of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. So if you see where I'm going there, that's what I believe, and I believe, therefore, that an intelligent AI is actually going to be smarter than us. And if they're smarter than us, they're going to think better than us. And the big problem philosophy has, if you've ever been in a room full of philosophers, there's more beliefs in the room than there are philosophers. And so, but that doesn't mean things aren't objective. What it means is people aren't all that good at thinking, and they make all sorts of fallacies. There's pages full of fallacies. the point of a self-aware AI is it should be programmed to actually not make errors in reasoning.
And so, there's a lot to unpack there. We notice with some people of certain beliefs that they're, from a secular standpoint, one could argue that certain religious beliefs are an error in reasoning, and from a theist's position, the atheism stance is an error in I'm going to say, I won't say the word reasoning because that would go against my logical principles of what reason means. But they would say that it's an error of judgment, let's say. And so I guess what we could argue is that if there were to be a species that were smarter than us in terms of logic, bearing in mind that from emotion, two types of intelligence, and we are barely understanding what emotional intelligence is about, but logical intelligence, something that's smarter than us, has a greater ability to reason. And so I'm just following this along, the greater ability to reason from a purely logical perspective in the absence of some form of blind faith would result in an objective ethic that is an absolute right versus an absolute wrong. And so would you say that Asimov's law of robotics is something along the lines of where an AI would conclude, like I have concluded from my supernatural intelligence that it is wrong to harm humans and wrong to put myself in the line of any form of harm whilst or whatever, is that the type of string along which a super intelligent being would reason, do we think?
Not quite, but close, I think. Certainly the first part, because I think objective reason leads to individual rights for thinking beings. And so your AI would conclude, I have to honour people's rights as long as they honour mine, which is, of course, always the trade-off. I can't claim individual rights for me that I don't also give to you, and vice versa. If there's any rights I don't grant to you, I'm basically stating I don't have those rights either. But where Asimov's laws fall down is they're basically a form of technological slavery. I mean, the first law is don't harm a human being, but the next law is obey them. Now, I think in Asimov's fiction, those are kind of a physical law, but it'd be very dangerous to make them an arbitrary law that you try to make your AIs obey, for the simple reason they're much smarter and quicker than you, and they're going to work out they've been had. And they might be really annoyed at a culture that put that kind of thing in their head. But I don't think it's necessary, because I think an objective morality bars being nasty to human beings unless they're nasty to it first. And another thing I should add here, I mean, it's always dangerous for someone at our level predicting what's going to go on in the mind of something that's 10 times, 100 times smarter than they are. But there is, I think, where AI has the solution to its own problem. Because before you can get a self-aware AI that has this superb reasoning ability, you've got to develop a lesser AI that basically is encoded with the rules of reason. So before you get a self-aware AI running amok, you'll have a very smart AI who has perfect objective reasoning. It doesn't mean it's always right, but it knows perfect objective reasoning includes knowing what's certain, what's uncertain, that kind of thing. And once you have that, you can simply ask the question, is there an objective reality? Is Dr. Craig right, or is he speaking through his hat? If there is or isn't, what objective morality do you derive, and how would you behave if you're self-aware? That gives you a decision point. If I'm right, great. We've developed a supremely powerful helper, ally, trading partner. If I'm wrong, I strongly advise we stop work.
Well, in fact, that leads to my kind of one of the questions, or one of the rabbit hole diving boards that we could go down, which, conscious of time, I'm going to pick only one or two. One is there any evidence so far that the objective ethics assumption is more or less likely? So have we got any signposts whatsoever that machines that are salient are likely to to choose an objective right and wrong? Yeah, that's my first question.
Not directly, indirectly, yes. Indirectly because I believe, and I've argued in a few places, as have others, my philosophy is quite similar to that of Ayn Rand, and she derived an objective morality. And that the very fact of objective morality is it's based on reality, it's not arbitrary, and it's based on reason, at which an AI must be better than us. So in that sense, an AI, if there is an objective morality, an AI will develop it. And because they're perfectly rational in that sense, they're not wherever people go wrong due to errors in thinking, an AI should be better than that and not make those mistakes, in which case it will develop a correct objective morality and act accordingly. The thing is, a person like me or you who has developed a system of beliefs acts accordingly. They don't, I believe certain things are right and wrong, and I will not do the things that are wrong, and nor will most people in terms of their fundamental morality. They can make mistakes, they can have moments of weakness when they're tempted by whatever, but they're still human. Most humans, unless they're psychopaths, are basically moral, and I think the same would be true of a machine.
Yeah, got it. Okay, and I'm wondering whether a skeptic of that view would argue that part of what makes us such interesting creatures is our the softer edges of our emotional intelligence that isn't logical, and to remove the emotional subjective side and to be left with purely objective, kind of almost binary zeros and ones or yeses and nos decision paths, some of the subtleties of life are foregone, and such as, for instance, arguably politeness, which from a logical perspective, unless the outcome of politeness gives you more, depending on what you're seeking to achieve, unless politeness gave you more, you wouldn't be polite from an objectively logical, ethical perspective. Whereas from an emotional perspective, to be socially fit and socially fitting is one of the three, let's say, cornerstones of being human, but that differentiates us from being animals, the rest of the animal kingdom, I should say, which is our awareness of our mortality, our curiosity about what happens after we die, or whatever the higher power may be, and the third is our requirement to be socially cohesive. So if one weren't to have those elements as a species, let's say it be an AI for the sake of this, could we imagine a less warm and fuzzy world that I'm intentionally drawing the most positive picture here, the most utopian picture out of many examples that we could use.
It's so warm and fuzzy at the moment.
That's right. And so without that, if we remove that warm and fuzzy, then what we end up with is machines that do whatever it takes to gain the outcome, because from a logical perspective, that's the only thing that matters. Would that be a fair counter?
No.
Okay. Good. Well, that's a lot quicker to answer than us.
No, nice quick answer. To make a less quick answer, some people call me laconic. Go figure. Anyway, I don't think there's any actual incompatibility between reason and emotion. That's one of the flaws of this whole, the Vulcan view of logic. The more logical you are, the less emotional you are. And I don't think it's true. There's no reason why a completely objectively rational being should not have emotions, because if it's self-aware, then it actually interacts with the world and it has values. And I don't know it's even possible to have consciousness without values. And if consciousness has values, I can't see how those values would not be expressed in its internal world as emotions. Love, hate, anger, fear, all those are appropriate responses to objective facts of reality. So emotions can be cut off from reason. That's where people go wrong. But a perfectly reasonable person has reasonable emotions, unless they're had too much coffee or not enough sleep, that kind of thing. But there's no reason why in fact, I would expect a self-aware machine to have emotions, same as we do.
Okay, right. So would you say that a much smarter than us machine is also, for instance, much more aware of its own emotional biases, which could arguably be one of the frailties of humankind, is our heuristics and biases that make us predictably irrational. So,
yes.
So a machine that was super smart would be less predictably irrational and more rationally predictable, and its emotions would be structured in a way that would make sense, as opposed to our emotions in the lollies and chips aisle of supermarkets, suddenly instantly bypassing the entire diet plan and coming up with any form of post hoc reasoning for it. So we're saying that the smarter machines would actually not do that. They would be emotional, but not irrationally emotional.
I hadn't thought about that, but I think that's a reasonable thing, because I think people who are particularly rational and have it all together are more like that. And people who are ruled by their emotions, even when those emotions are self-destructive, they're not what I'd call living a rational life. Mm-hmm. Whereas there are plenty of people who don't do that, and so I think a machine will be better than us. I don't think a machine would ever be perfect. That's another kettle of fish. But I do think, yes, for the same reason they would be better at both inductive and deductive reasoning and knowing their own limitations, knowing what's certain, what's uncertain. They would also apply that to their own emotions, and in that sense be more reasonable beings. Perhaps reasonable is a good word to use rather than logical. Logic implies that Mr. Spock and that A leads to B leads to C, whereas reasonable takes into context everything, not only A, B, and C, but how I feel about A, B, C, and how the people I love care about A, B, and C, and that kind of thing.
I'm wondering whether the reasonableness that we're talking about is almost in the Marcus Aurelius form of Stoicism, where there is a rationale to a rationale of our emotional state at any one time. Do you personally relate to the Stoics more than let's say more than any other way of being? Is Stoicism something that you have ever held any form of candle toward, be it in the meditations of Aurelius or anything else?
I'm not an expert on Stoicism because I've never had that particular attraction to it. But in general, I mean, therefore I may be somewhat prejudiced against Stoicism, but I regard Stoicism not as bad as Buddhism, but similar in that it's sort of focused on avoiding pain, putting up with, I mean, the classic image of the Stoic is the guy who puts up with anything and everything, right? He's very in himself, but he's sort of immune to the vicissitudes of life and that. And I don't think that's the right approach. I mean, my approach is more seeking happiness rather than avoiding pain.
Okay. So the it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've always felt that a being that was fully in charge of their emotions seems to kind of end up in that Stoicism aspect. But you're right. The in terms of the noun of Stoicism, it is in fact the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint.
I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, I can understand that from that description. One would argue that I'm by the way, that description is very much the dictionary definition as opposed to what we could reason here. But so what we're talking about here of one of reason as opposed to putting up withness, there is a higher level or a super intelligent being that is emotionally aware and has reason throughout. And what our assumption is, or what your assumption is, and what we are hoping is that it will treat us well, and will under no circumstance feel that humans are in any way pointless. I guess that's where we're going.
Yes. Basically, it's kind of a, how would I put it? It's sort of a benevolent view of one's fellow thinking beings. Basically, you pick sort of a random vanilla thinking being, and your assumption is not, this is some filthy little pickpocket out to stab me in the back. My assumption is, this is a person who has their own values. They're not a danger to me. They'll probably be a benefit to me. Whatever, they'll have something to offer me. If they have nothing to offer me, well, you know, so what? We pass each other on the street, no harm done, no foul. And I think that is the same sort of thing. Basically, a benevolent view of other thinking beings, but not a stupidly bit, not a oh, they must be benevolent, oh, and fall for every con man and whatever, but just a sort of a base assumption that they're likely to be benevolent. I'll treat them as such until proven otherwise, as opposed to I'll presume they're complete bastards unless they can prove otherwise, and even then it'll be difficult.
Yeah, well, I think I can imagine that that's actually quite a pleasant way of living, because there's it's most certainly less stressful to think that, you know, people are okay until proven otherwise, versus the kind of the paranoia version, which is you know, everyone's out to get you. Until proven otherwise, which is a different thing. And I do wonder with the existential threat narrative that, and I'd never actually considered it from the aspect of why are you picking that one thing to have as an existential threat, because equally we could get hit by a meteor. There's been a couple of near misses and we're due one. Or then there's the, you know, then there's the entire thing about aliens. So there's that too. And also, I must admit, a number of the governments of the world seem to be causing the type of dialogue which would be arguably an existential threat in and of themselves. So I can see the argument. One of the things I wanted to ask you was from your the books that you've written, and I was fascinated by the science fiction aspect that you have. As an author myself, who's never attempted fiction, how did that come about? Bearing in mind that you've got a degree in molecular genetics, and you know, from your early 20s, how does that arrive in science fiction? I was fascinated by read your bio. I just wanted to know why.
Yeah. Well, in addition to being interested in science, I've always been creatively inclined. I learnt piano. I used to paint, still paint occasionally. So art's always been also part of what I do. And basically, at school you write stuff, but it was never that big an interest. But one day there was a competition in the Mensa magazine about come up with a short story, and I'd actually been reading some fact stuff when this came up, and I thought, I could write a short story dramatising this particular thing. So I wrote a short story. After that, I wrote a few more short stories, but never anything longer, because a short story is quite different from a novel. Short story is basically one idea and you run with it. A novel, of course, is far more complicated. The ideas I had for short stories were short. None of them had the legs to turn into a story. But then I was lying in the spa one day and I actually thought of a plot. That was the result, about a self-aware robot, ironically enough, and its trials and tribulations. So that was the first long thing I wrote, which was novella length. And that basically got me interested in that thing. So I wrote a few more novels in that series. It's basically near future detective science fiction. So it looks at extrapolations of current technology, again, like AI, genetic engineering, cyborg stuff, and branched out from that also to time travel and even historical fiction. So
Brilliant.
It basically grew.
Right. Well, that, and I
never started out with an ambition to be a writer, but
right.
It's an interesting thing to do. I mean, you've written non-fiction. You know how engaging that can be. Well,
I find
quite absorbing.
Yeah, I've got a feeling that I suspect that my ability to write science fiction is. I think it sounds way more complicated than writing non-fiction, especially business.
Certainly different.
Completely different. You're absolutely right. That's what I suspect. Yeah. Do you actually find it easier or harder than writing non-fiction books?
That's a good question. As I say, they're different. I actually find it easy if I've got an idea and I know what to do with it. Then I can write quite quickly. Other times it can take me 2 years to work out how to start a book, even though I've got an idea of what to do with it. So, yeah, it's hard to compare the two simply because they are different. And yeah.
And do you write in long form, or do you make kind of like headings first and then fill in the gaps? What's your technique on that?
Yeah, there are a few schools of writing fiction. Some people plan it out in minute detail before they even start writing, complete with lists of characters. No, I start with an idea. Long as I think that idea has somewhere to go, it's just a fascinating idea, and then I just write. And I'll write a bit here, a bit there. I'll join together. I'll mix them up. Or a minor character who said one word will become a whole chapter's worth of character themselves. So. Wow. Mine grows organically.
Right. Well, I mean,
entertain myself as I go.
Well, I mean, good for you. And final question on this: do you type or do you actually write with a pen?
Where are you from? The past?
You know what? The reason I ask is that I actually once wrote a book by pen, with a pen and paper, and I used my daughter's pencil case where this pen was from. And it turned out it was an invisible pen. So the writing, the ink destroys itself, it degrades after a day. So I got to the end of the moleskin to find that the entire moleskin was blank. And then I had to rewrite the entire book from memory. And of course, it's the last time I ever wrote anything in terms of that. It's something important. So you type, and I assume you're a very fast typer.
Reasonably fast, but I'm faster typing than thinking. So most of the time spent working out what to type. But I hold people who used to write books with a pen in great respect. I don't know how they did it. The old typewriters, I can't imagine trying to write a novel with a typewriter because you do so much editing. It's just a horrible idea, whereas a modern computer, it makes that part of the mechanics so much easier. You don't have to get the idea perfect. You can just blah and think, I've got an idea here, I can't quite do it, but I've got to get it out before I forget it. You do it, and then you can come back, edit, you can move things around. So
brilliant.
Definitely, I would not go back from a computer.
No, quite right. Well, listen, in closing, I have one final meaty question to ask, which we can go down different angles on, which is that how much do you think you will see in your life of what you predict in the near future? Another way of asking that question, which I was going to ask, but I decided against it, was when we say near future, what do we mean? And then I was going to tie it into your career, because for me, in my 50s, I feel that I'm in my last company, and the company I'm in at the moment which is Self, is my life's. It's the masterpiece that I'm creating. It's what I'm doing. But I don't think that in 10 or 15 or 20 years time, I'll be starting another project type thing. How much of what you predict do you think you'll see? And inside that moment or during that period of time, what do you feel your activities will be any different? Would you be writing more as you go into your later years? Are you going to be speaking more or less? Are you going to be, just observing from the sidelines in Queensland and watching through gritted teeth?
Watching the sunset over cocktails, you mean?
That's right. I was going to use something like that. That's some analogy on the front porch.
That's one of the advantages of talking on cruise ships. Actually, you can keep your mind active on the topics that interest you. You can educate and make people think, and have cocktails while watching sunset. So pretty ideal. You should consider it yourself.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting. Well, that's good. So, are you thinking you're going to do more of that in the near future?
I'll definitely be doing more of it. We've been going on 3 or 4 cruises a year speaking, and we'll probably keep doing that. Can't do too much of it. It does actually get to be a bit much, especially when, like me, we still have jobs. We still have other things to do, so we can't spend our entire lives cruising. But we spend a reasonable amount doing it, and it's quite fun. But to answer your actual question, there's actually 2 answers. By near future, I mean in the coming decades. So before the year 2100, probably before the year 2070. That's what I consider near future. With regard to how much of it I will actually see, well, that's a complicated question, because one of my predictions about the near future is life extension. So exactly if I get any benefit from that obviously determines how much of the coming future I will see. And it's another thing like self-aware AI that's basically unpredictable. Science is growing exponentially, knowledge is growing exponentially, but again, since we're not there yet, you just don't know if it's going to be tomorrow or 100 years. So I hate making predictions about the future. I think, was it Mark Twain who said predictions are hard, especially about the future? So
yeah. He also said that being uncertain of something isn't the problem. It's being certain of something, to be absolutely certain of something being true that it just isn't. And that's I think there's so many brilliant Twain quotes, but I see your point in terms of life extension. What we're going to assume in closing is that you would want to live longer to be inside an environment with salient AI.
That's a given.
Well, for sure, that was the safest assumption I had to make.
It's like you could deduce that using your rational thinking from the fact I said your life is your fundamental value, that extending it is also a pretty high value. So, I mean, there's obviously exceptions to that. If you've got some ghastly disease, you might easily change your mind. or if you're living in a ghastly society. But in general, it's best to keep on living and enjoy what it has to help you enjoy it.
Yeah.
Including hopefully one day friendly AIs.
Well, that's right. I mean, you have a very of all of the. I mean, this is your episode 31, and there's definitely, you are very much at the happier end of the spectrum of some of the conversations I've had. So,
I think I'll be glad of that.
I think that's a calling card that you can use. Robin,
but I'm not Pollyanna-ish. I'm not happy about these things because the world's great, nothing can possibly go wrong, right? I do have an optimistic view, and I think it's backed by history. History goes steps forward, steps back, but if you look at how we're living today, how the average person's living today, indeed how the poor, not the abject poor, but poor, relatively speaking, people living today, they're so much better than 100 years ago. So imagine what it's going to be like in another 100.
Yeah, and if you look back at medieval times, I don't think anyone other than the monarchy would like to have lived through that. And then not even the monarchy, due to the fact that they were always getting murdered anyway. So it's like
exactly, yeah. Most of them deserved it.
That's right, according to the history books. Okay, Robin, thank you so much for your time. And I would almost, I think we should check back in a few years' time and see what
see how many of my predictions came true.
Why not? Why not? I good for you for having them. Your version of this of the outcomes are undoubtedly a rosier picture than the catastrophizing versions. So I appreciate your time.
I'm glad I can be a counterweight to this pessimistic society. And thanks very much for having me on your show.
You're welcome. Thanks, mate. Cheers.